She brought a bag for me. My sister-in-law, a woman I had never met. She showed up at my door on a Wednesday morning with an overnight bag she had already packed. Toiletries, a phone charger, a change of clothes, folded and zipped and ready. My brother needed a bone marrow transplant, and after 22 years of silence, I was his only match. She expected me to leave with her that morning, and she was smiling the way people smile, when they believe the answer has already been decided. Then I looked at the return address label on the handle of the bag. My missing brother had been living 41 minutes away. That return address is the reason I need to tell you what I do for a living. I manage a regional mail distribution center, routing, forwarding, address verification. I spend my days tracing where things actually went versus where people claimed they sent them. The woman on my porch had no idea she had just handed a thread to someone professionally trained to pull it. Marcus is 4 years older than me. He left when I was 22. No fight, no farewell. He stopped calling, stopped being reachable, and my family absorbed it quietly, the way families absorb things they would rather not examine. My mother said he needed space. My father said that was just Marcus. I said nothing because I was 22 and still believed that people who love you eventually come back. 3 years after he left, I mailed him a birthday card to the last address we had. It came back unopened. Stamped in the corner was a return address, a town I had never heard of, somewhere I had never placed Marcus. I kept the envelope. Professional habit. You don't throw away a forwarding record. That envelope sat in a box in my closet for 19 years. The morning Diane showed up at my door, I pulled it out. The town on the return address matched the label on her bag. Both said Kellerton. My father got sick 5 years ago. Lung disease, slow and merciless. Over 2 years, I managed everything alone. The appointments, the insurance calls, the family notifications. I sent certified letters to every address we had for Marcus. 2 came back undeliverable. 1 came back marked forwarded, redirected to an address in Kellerton. I filed it and kept moving, because my father was dying, and there was no room left to chase a brother who had already made his choice. Dad died 3 years ago. I held his hand when it happened. The chair beside mine, the one where Marcus should have been sitting, was empty. And I remember thinking that the emptiness of that chair was the loudest thing in the room. I have a daughter, Nadia. She is 8 now. When she was old enough to notice the gap, she asked me why Uncle Marcus never came to her birthday parties. I told her he lived far away. I did not know yet how wrong that was. The evening before Diane arrived, my mother called. Marcus had been diagnosed with aplastic anemia. His bone marrow was failing. The National Registry had identified me as a compatible donor, and the transplant team needed me to begin screening within days. I asked why Marcus hadn't called me himself. She said he was too weak. I asked how long she had known. She went quiet, a deliberate, practiced kind of quiet. Then she said 8 months, 8 months. My name had been in the registry for 7 of them. Nobody called. Nobody told me. The decision to reach out was made only now, with the screening window nearly closed. The urgency was not medical. It was manufactured. I had been kept out of the conversation long enough that by the time I was brought in, the room for questions had almost disappeared. The next morning, Diane arrived with the bag. She sat at my kitchen table and explained the procedure, the compatibility, the timeline, the logistics. She had a folder with her. Inside it, a summary of the diagnosis, a screening schedule, and a list of questions she assumed I would want answered. She had anticipated my practical concerns. She had not anticipated anything else. Then she said, "He doesn't have anyone else." I looked at the bag on the floor. At the return address on the handle, I told her I needed the rest of the day. She hesitated. I asked her again to leave. When the door closed, I laid everything on my kitchen table. The birthday card envelope, 19 years old, return address, Kellerton. The certified letter from my father's final year, forwarding stamp, Kellerton. 2 pieces of mail, sent years apart. both pointing to the same small town. I opened my laptop and searched the county assessor's public property records, the same free database anyone can access for deed filings and ownership history. I entered Marcus's full legal name, one result. A residential property in Kellerton, purchased 9 years ago. Current owner, Marcus David Ellison, not an apartment, not a temporary arrangement. A house with his name on the deed, less than an hour from mine. He had planted himself there and grown a life and kept it hidden like something that would cost him if it were found. I called my mother. I read her the address from the deed filing. She didn't deny it. She told me Marcus had reached out to her 9 years ago. He asked her not to tell me. She had visited him, driven to Kellerton, held his children, met Diane, stood in his living room, and driven home every time without saying a word to me. Marcus believed, she said, that if I knew how close he had been, I would be too angry to help when the time came. Managing my reaction required managing the information I had access to. Then she said it, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. He needed a fresh start. And you've always been fine. I never worried about you the way I worried about him. I let that settle. I did not fill the silence. I drove to Kellerton the next morning. A gray 2-story house, a hanging planter on the porch, a basketball hoop at the far end of the driveway, the kind you buy for a child who is learning to shoot. The kind of house that looks like exactly what it is, a place where someone has been living, quietly and completely, for years. I sat in my car and thought about Nadia at 6 years old, asking me across the dinner table why Uncle Marcus never comes to her birthday parties. She had asked the way children ask things, plainly without armor, just wanting the answer to make sense. I told her he lived far away. I had been sitting 41 minutes from the truth. I walked to the door and knocked. Marcus opened it. He was thinner than I remembered, though whether that was the illness or simply the years, I could not tell. Diane stood behind him in the hallway. Neither of them spoke. I held up the birthday card. Still sealed, unopened for 19 years. Return address in the upper corner, Kellerton. I mailed this when Dad was still healthy, I said. You were already here. He stepped back from the door. I came inside. We sat in his living room. On the wall behind him, photographs. His family, 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 7 and 9, who had grown up in this town without knowing my daughter existed. And in one frame, partially visible over Marcus's shoulder, my mother, standing in this room, smiling. The photograph looked several years old. She had been here. She had held his children in this house. She had driven home and told me nothing. Did you ask her to keep it from me? I said. I didn't know how to face you. Every year it got harder. By the time I was sick... He stopped. By the time you were sick, the only option left was sending your wife to my door with a bag. He did not answer. I'm not here to punish you, I said. He nodded. Barely. But I am done carrying the version of this story you built for me. I let that sit. Whatever I decide about the transplant will be based on truth. Not a manufactured deadline. Not a bag packed on my behalf. Not a story about distance that was never real. He was quiet for a long time. His daughter's drawing was framed on the wall to my right, a house with a sun above it. I'm sorry, he said. I know that's not enough. Not yet, I said. But it's a start. I called my mother that evening. I described the photographs, her face on his wall, the life she had folded herself into without telling me. She said I was making this about myself, that Marcus was sick. That family stays together. I said, you stood in his living room and held his grandchildren and drove home and told me he was unreachable. That is not staying together. That is choosing whose feelings to protect. You chose his for 9 years. And then you chose them again when you gave me days to respond to something you had known about for 8 months, she cried. I let her. I did not fill the silence with reassurance she had not earned. 3 days later, Diane sent me a message. Longer than I expected. She said she had been asking Marcus to call me for years. That the bag and the manufactured timeline had been her decision. She had, panicked watching him decline, and thought she was cutting through delay to what mattered most. She said she understood now that what she had cut through was my right to decide. She did not ask forgiveness. She said, "You deserved a phone call from him. You always did. I am sorry I let my fear replace what you were owed." It was the first honest thing anyone had said to me without me having to locate it myself. That night, Nadia asked where I had been. I sat on the edge of her bed and told her that Uncle Marcus lives closer than we thought. She looked at me carefully. "Can I meet his kids?" I smiled for the first time in days. I wrote Marcus a letter. 4 pages. About our father. About Nadia's birthday question. About every holiday shaped around an absence that was never really distance. At the end, I wrote something I had not planned, that I did not know what came next between us, but I was willing to find out. On honest terms. On a timeline I chose. I sealed the envelope. I addressed it to Kellerton. This time, I knew it would arrive. 2 weeks later, through the registry's official donor process, I received a proper outreach packet, a real consideration window, a coordinator who had not been briefed by anyone in Marcus's household. I completed the screening on my schedule. Through proper channels, after the truth had been told, I went through with the donation, not because a bag was packed for me. Not out of obligation or guilt, because once the manipulation was stripped away and the decision was genuinely returned to me, I found that I still wanted to help. Freely, clearly, with my eyes open and my dignity intact. That is the difference between being collected and being asked. And it is the only difference that matters. 41 minutes. That is how far my brother lived while I mourned him as someone who had vanished. That is the distance my mother drove to hold his children and drove home in silence. That is the distance between what I was told and what was true. When I finally drove it myself, I understood something I had not before. I could have made that trip at any moment. I just did not know I needed to. Now I do. And from here, every mile between us is a choice we both make honestly. With the distance finally named, and the address no longer a secret,